Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Vigor Talk, and this time I'm going to talk to you about this beautiful beast that is the Pentax 6x7. Before we begin, as usual, a little message. Please, if you want to support the channel, you can buy this book. It's a photography dev manual and contains all the basics that you really need to know if you want to do photograph, and it's a very nice review, so check it out for you or as a gift for someone that is starting with photography. And if you don't want a technical book, this is a novel, Lasting Photographs, that I wrote, and it's a photographic adventure with starting with the discovery of some negatives in Florida, and goes around the world and in the past 8 years in the past to discover who was the owner of the images. So one or the other and you will support the channel. The links are usually, as usual, down there in the description. Thank you. Now, Pentax 6x7. First of all, take a look at the little slideshow with the pictures, some pictures that I took with the 6x7, and then we will talk about the camera. As you have seen, with this camera I took only black and white pictures, and this is for one reason, that actually I'm really into black and white, and that this camera is kind of a recent acquisition of mine, so that's all. And but one day I will try this camera with the color field. About this camera, the Pentax 6x7 was introduced by Pentax in 1969, and it was the original version. Was a good camera, but it needed some improvements. So in 1976 Pentax introduced the second version, that is this one with the MLU, or this is the mirror lock up function. And when they inserted this function, they also changed a lot of things inside the camera. So a lot of the mechanism for advancing the film were changed, and the camera became much more reliable. The camera remained the same until 1999 practically, because in 1990 there was a new version that was the Pentax 67, but basically it was just a change in name and some aesthetic. The internal mechanism and the functions and all the things were exactly the same. In 1999 all changed with the Pentax 67 II, that was much more electronic, with the TTL metering and all these kind of things. By the way, this version here has the prism that is non-metering, so it's not TTL. You can buy the TTL prism and you can have a reading of the exposure through the lens, but I don't need that. I usually use an external spot meter. I use the zone system and I'm good with that. Or if I want to do something very fast, and some pictures that you saw in the slideshow are made like that, it's just the Sunny 16 rule and a lot of experience to compensate for the situation, and the camera can be used without many problems. This camera is really a beast of camera, and when Pentax introduced the camera, they say they decided to do this kind of design that is basically a Spotmatic on steroids, to answer to some complaining about the people, because they say that the handle of the medium format cameras at the time was not great, and they referred to cameras as the Mamiya 6x7 or Hasselblad, for example, that have this cubic shape and you handle in a different way. Actually, this was Pentax 8. For me, Hasselblad is much easier to manage. This one is good, but you have to use in some way your right hand. With Hasselblad, you just use your left hand also to trigger the shutter and this kind of things, and your right hand is only for focusing and selecting the shutter speed and aperture. With this camera, you need to use your right hand to advance the film, click, and all these kind of things. And so at a certain point, I don't know if it's a problem of mine, but I tend to put some weight on this hand, and I really feel it after a while. So not exactly what I love in a camera. The nice thing is that with this shape it's very easy to do vertical or horizontal images, less easier with the Mamiya 6x7 where you have to turn the back. So that's the thing. Some people love it, some people don't like it too much. I'm in the middle way. I really like this camera. I really like how it is, how it feels in the hands, but for prolonged use, I much prefer the other style that you can manage with only your left hand and you have your right hand that has no weight on it. So that's a personal preference. This camera, technically, this camera has a shutter that is a mechanical shutter with a curtains, and it is mechanical but is electronically controlled. So the fact is that here you have a battery and you need to use a battery. Without a battery, this camera is dead. And that is something that I always don't like it 100%. I much prefer when a camera does not require batteries, but still this battery lasts so long that is absolutely not a problem. And the precision of the shutter is also something very nice. The shutter goes from 1 second to 1,000th of a second, and that's pretty good. The B-pose, obviously. The thing that is a little bit difficult with the shutter is that the synchro speed, the maximum synchro speed, is 1/30th of a second, and that's a little bit slow. It's easy also in studio if you have pilot lights on your flash units and the pilot lights are not very low. It's easy to get some ghost images from the continuous light of the pilot lights. So that's a little bit of a limitation. The shutter of this camera and the mirror associated with it are pretty nice and noisy. But the thing is that obviously the camera is a 6x7, so there's this huge mirror that must go up and down because it's a reflex, and that mirror can cause a lot of vibration, and this is why in 76 Pentax introduced the MLU version with the mirror cap. The thing is, if you want to do slow shutter speeds like 160, 130 seconds, a lot of time you can have some vibration from the mirror. So the idea is to put it on the tripod, and the things that you can do is just put the mirror up and click, and at that point you avoid all the vibrations before the shooting. After doesn't count, so also if the mirror goes up and down you feel it. It's kind of impressive how much torque you feel it in your hands when the mirror moves. Also with the mirror cap, when the mirror comes down you really feel it. But this is the option of the camera, and is that kind of limitation of the camera. But to be honest, if you really know how to handle the camera, how to keep the camera in your hands, and this is another thing that is kind of strange, because I see too many people trying to keep the camera like this as a 35mm camera, and this doesn't give very much resistance, especially when you have the vibration. You can feel them. This camera is to keep like this, and by the way, the usual manual says that, so this is the thing. And if you get the habit to handle the camera in the proper way, that's a very nice thing, and you will avoid a lot of vibration from the mirror, so that's a good thing. Other thing, this camera can take 120 rolls and 220 rolls. 220 rolls are no more on the market, so basically 120 rolls. It's very easy to switch between 100 and 220. It's just a switch here for the counter, and there's a regulation on the pressure plate of the film that must be moved. But that's a very easy thing and a very good thing that can be done with this camera. As I said, the synchro flash 1/30 of a second. Obviously you have the FP for the bulbs and X for the flash, electronic flash. And technically it's all there. There's not much else to say about this camera, except the fact that a curious thing is that the camera has a double bayonet for the lenses. As you can see here, you have an internal bayonet and you have an external bayonet. And the external bayonet is for big, heavy telephoto lenses. So that was a good thing. I never tried a lens with the external bayonet, but in the case you will lose the transmission of the aperture to the camera and vice versa, so you will need to stop down when you take the pictures and these kind of things. But that's all. And exactly, this is just a Spotmatic with steroids. And the quality of this camera is really, really impressive. First of all, the format is beautiful because the 6x7 is really kind of rectangular, but with great proportions. I'm used to the square format. What I love when I take pictures, and my mind like the square format for composition, and when I go rectangular I like to have something as the 6x7, 4x5, so that is not much rectangular. I don't like at all the 35mm. The 2 to 3 format ratio is, for me, is really too much, because it requires always dynamic compositions, and a lot of times I like to take pictures that are static, that have not too much dynamic in them, or better, the dynamic is inside the image and in the relationship between the parts of the image, but I don't like that forced dynamic, horizontal or vertical, that is given by the very elongated rectangular. So quality is fantastic. If you want one, get one. And by the way, by the way, this is a camera that you can find online still at a good price. Obviously, you can change the prism. The focus screen here is not interchangeable by users. And is not very luminous. I was used to the Acromat with Hasselblad, and this one is a little bit dark. The focus screen on the 67-2 was improved a lot. Here is, you must get used to a little bit dark focusing screen, but it's still great. So there's no problem with that unless you really work in the dark. At least for me, I was used to 4x5 and this kind of camera, so I'm not very. I can manage a little bit dark focusing screen. That's all. The things about this camera is the quality of the lenses. The quality of the lenses is pretty impressive. When I bought this camera, and by the way, I didn't buy this camera when at the time of film. As I said, I went with Hasselblad for medium format, but I bought this camera last year, and was I always looked at this camera because I really like the aesthetic, the shape, and this kind of things. And I was looking on eBay, and I found this that was sold for spare parts and as an working camera. And I decided, why not to get it and try to repair it. It's something that I like to do. It's fun for me to buy broken cameras and try to put them back together and make them work again. So I got this camera, and luckily it was very easy to fix. And so I fixed the camera without problems. So my first time fixing a 6x7 went very well. And I started to use this camera because, you know, when you have a new camera, you just want to use it. And I put a roll of film. I was on vacation, and I started to take pictures, and I was, okay, I need to go back to film. Everything that I knew and everything that was my style, my mental workflow, and everything came back to me. It was a moment I was kind of in a creative crisis. A lot of things were going on in my life, but also photographically with digital, I got a lot of bad habits that I really don't like. And one of them is to take too many pictures and to start to put the camera in front of my head, my eyes, before I figure out the picture. And when I started with this, all came back to me and was, okay, I'm looking at the scene and I'm imagining a picture and I'm imagining these things even before I take the camera out of the bag. And the limit of 10 shots for a 120 roll film, it's fantastic, because you really do not want to waste any picture, and you think twice or thrice before you take a picture. And in the end, I watched the results and was, wow, I'm again there, I'm again in the game, and I'm again able to create what I want. And so I'm kind of very affectionated to this camera, and the fact that it's so heavy and so huge, it's another things that make you think twice before you take the camera out of the bag. It's something that really forces you to slow down. It forces you to use your hand before your hands, and that's something that I was missing, and it's something that when I shoot with digital, there's always also, if I understand the problems and this kind of things, I always take too many pictures and I always have the camera too long in front of my eyes. So with this, I went back to that feeling and that workflow that was using my mind and my eyes to figure out an image, to create an image, and not just to take picture of something in front of us. I see advertise of cameras with 30 photographs per second and this kind of things, and you think, what's that? We are transforming ourselves in a recorder of the world every moment, and we forget that the essence of photography is to find first of all a meaning, something that you want to transmit, and at that point find a way to transmit it in the best way and think what you are doing. With digital, too many of us, also professionals, start to just take pictures without connecting the brain before. We start to become amateurs a lot of time. This camera helped me to go back to get back to my roots and to get back to my mental workflow that was the right one for me. So I love this camera for the reason. But this said, lenses. I started with the 45 millimeters and 1.4. It's no, sorry, 4 as an aperture, and it's a fantastic lens. Very sharp, very beautiful. It can take the light perfectly. I didn't found any problem of flare or these kind of things. It's I was used with the Hasselblad super wide, and Between this is the Biogon. I mean, this arrives close to the Biogon. That is really the reference in that field. So, very nice lens, very great lens. And I don't have the 105 millimeters 2.4. I know it's the best lens, and everybody says that, but it's actually expensive, and I still want to find one that is to repair or something like that online, so I can have some fun with that. But I don't miss it much. And so this was my first lens, and was the 45 millimeters, and is a great lens. The second step, looking for cheap lenses, the second step was this macro 135 and 135 millimeters f4, and this is a macro lens, and is very under evaluated online. You can find it very cheap, and this for portraits is fantastic. I used it for portraits, and if you like to do frames that are close-ups on the subject, this is perfect. You can really, without going too close, because it's 135 millimeters, so it's a slight tele, and but you really can do very nice close-ups, and it's a fantastic lens. To do real macro, the limit of this is 1 to 2 ratio. To do real macro you need extension tubes, but really this is a great lens. And by the way, something about all the lenses. The lens shade, in this case this one works for the 135 millimeters and 150, and I see when I do videos, obviously I take it off because it's easier to see the lens, and these are really huge. So in a lot of my videos also about the other cameras, 35 millimeters, you don't see the lens shade, but a lot of time actually when I show them, I'm sitting at the table. I don't use the camera, but in a lot of times you look in the YouTube videos or things where there's the photographer taking the pictures, and you see no lens shade on the camera, and they try to evaluate the quality of an optic on this kind of things without the lens shade, and this is absolutely crazy. The lens shade, the lens hood is something that will really change the quality of the lens. Better contrast, less flare, and all these kind of things, and it's really essential to have a good lens hood that will protect the lens from external light. So always use them. And by the way, sometimes you see movies or things like that, or even pictures of professional photographers with the lens hood reversed on the lens. That's something that makes me crazy. So use the lens hood always. 135, beautiful. Second lens that I got, it was the 200 millimeters, and this is another really great lens. The lens hood is incorporated in the lens, so that's very easy to use and perfect, and you have no excuse to not use it. And the quality of the lens is really great, very sharp. I don't use it much because I'm not really for telephoto lenses. I'm more on wide angles and moderate telephotos, but that's really a good lens. And the last one that I got, and I don't know why everybody's talking about how to focus the bokeh of the 105.4. This is the 150 2.8, and I got this again. It was spare parts, so I had to fix it. It was just a nice cleanup, and fixed it. And this lens is absolutely fantastic, and the autofocus, the shallow depth of field, and I don't know why I don't like to call it bokeh, but the shallow depth of field that you can have with this lens is pretty impressive. I was used to the 150 on Hasselblad, but it was 4. This is 2.8, so much shallower depth of field, and very sharp when it needs to be sharp, and The autofocus areas are really really beautiful. It's really a great portrait lens. It's really a lens that I'm glad that I found, and you can find them. Really, the strange thing is that you have to pay a ton of money for the 105 2.4, and you can find this kind of lenses pretty cheap around, and that's really a great thing. And these are good. This 150 for portrait is fantastic, also because it implies that you can stay a little bit further from the subject, so it's really a nice thing. So this said, quality of the lens is fantastic. Camera is very sturdy and very reliable, and it's a really great camera, easy to use, perfect if you come from 35 millimeters. You don't have to relearn everything about the camera. You just have to learn that the camera is kept like that, but this is also in the 35 millimeters. So beautiful camera. If you want if you are not familiar, you don't have an external meter, or you're not familiar with the zone system, these kind of things, you can just buy a TTL prism and use that on the camera. With the TTL prism, there's one thing that is essential, is that before you take off the prism, you have to take off any lens. So if you take off the prism before you take off the lens, that is really risky. It's something that there's a chain in the viewfinder that transmit the aperture to the, actually is here, there's this little chain that transmit the aperture of the lens to the prism, and with the TTL metered prism, if you take off the prism with the lens in, you risk to break the chain. So that's really something that is not you must be very careful. With this, no problem, because there's no connection. So, and by the way, this is the focus screen with the prism in the middle, and pretty huge, as you can see. So that's all. The camera is this, and it's very easy to use. As I said, the quality is absolutely great. It's a very nice way to enter the medium format world without spending too much. So it's a really great option and great camera. Perfect. This said, I think I said everything I had to say about this camera. If you enjoyed the video, please put a like, subscribe to the channel, and share the video with your friends. As usually, thank you very much for watching the video, and as I said before, if you want to support the channel, one or two, these books will help me to go on with these kind of videos. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time, and probably with an Hasselblad, but I still don't know. I don't know. Next time we will see, but sure, in the future I will go with the Hasselblad, and I will do a little comparison between this and the Hasselblad and how it can be used. So thank you very much for watching. See you next time.